care about education. Some towns I've worked for, if they can find 2 people to run, they're fortunate. So we are really fortunate. Now, but before I go on with we begin, I wanted to mention a few things. Mike Summersgill, who is on our board of executive board, asked me to mention that they're having a barbecue competition on, let's see, when is it? Sunday, October 22nd. And the money collected will be used to help victims of the hurricanes that we've had. There are some flyers on the back. There'll be lots of activities for children. So if you're looking for something to do and be helpful at the same time, you might consider this. Also, 255 Tuscan, which is the apartments that are opening down across from we'll be having an open house, a ribbon cutting and open house on Saturday, this Saturday, October 21st, from 12 noon to 2 o'clock. So if you'd like to take a look at these apartments and see what they're like and see if you're interested or just curious, 12 to 2 on Saturday the 21st. Now, because we had so many candidates, we decided to change the format. So the format will be that each candidate will have up to 5 minutes for a statement that will include introducing themselves, giving you their background, stating what sets them apart from the other candidates, and describing 2 or 3 of their goals. Each presentation is limited to 5 minutes, but you do not have to take all 5 minutes if you don't find it necessary. At that point, we will have a question and answer period. When you have 15 seconds left, Florence, our noble timekeeper, could you hold that sign up for me? Will signal that you have 15 seconds, and we hope that you will abide by Florence's timing. Jim Buchanan is helping with the timing, and Victor Luca is videotaping this, and you can tell your friends and neighbors that they can watch if they have missed it. So since I'm a librarian, we put everything in alphabetical order. So we will start with Elizabeth Baker, and you have 5 minutes to tell us about it, and welcome again. Is your microphone on?
That's a good question. Great, thank you. Thank you, Carol, and I'd like to begin by thanking the Hilton Neighborhood Association. This debate is one of the cornerstones of the Board of Education race for several decades now, and we appreciate both your hospitality and the deep commitment in this community to our schools. And so my name is Elizabeth Baker, and for the past 2.5 years, I've had the honor to serve on the Board of Education. After I finished my first year on the board, I was asked by my colleagues to serve as president in a time in which we were undergoing a fair amount of transition and instability, both within the district and within the board. I'm a labor lawyer by profession, working on behalf of low-wage and immigrant workers, and for my entire adult life, I've been professionally dedicated to working for social and economic justice. I moved here to Maplewood 15 years ago. I have one daughter at Columbia High School who's a sophomore, and my younger daughter is a 7th grader at Maplewood Middle. I almost said 6th grade because I'm not accepting yet that she's growing up. I ran for the board 3 years ago because I felt that what I was doing by day in terms of effecting change, bringing into effect sound policy, and working on behalf of people who were marginalized and everyday people who were falling through the cracks was the type of work that needed to be done in our school district. I wanted to make our schools welcoming, engaging, and challenging for every single child who walks through the doors, and I saw a school system that often looked the other way or was indifferent to children who were walking through their doors. I wanted to make sure that every aspect of the board's work and the district's work was focused on making that happen. Then and now, there have been forces at play that have impeded our work. Some of these forces are external, such as what's happened in Trenton over the last 8 years with our funding and the leadership in Trenton that's been hostile to the needs of public school districts like ours. And some of the forces that have impeded our work have been internal, forces of our own making, historical structures within our schools that have kept children back, structures that have been based on bias or far and long outdated pedagogical practice that has created a culture of low expectations for too many children. We are engaged in the work of deep systemic change, and that is not easy. For the last 2.5 years, I have been working hard not only to build consensus within the board and capacity within the board, which we had lost due to turnover on the board and a pendulum swinging back and forth over the years, essentially based on equity and race. I've been building the capacity and also trying to lay the foundations in the school district to move the work forward. We have not been able to do what needs to be done for our schools, to improve pedagogy, to make our schools welcoming for every child, in part because we did not maintain and update and evolve and resource critical infrastructure in the district. This work, our data, our communications, our facilities, our training for teachers, our registration process, all this work goes to climate, and all this work goes to how children and families are welcomed and supported in our schools. I have been working very hard every day to do the best I can to advance every aspect of this work. I cannot say that I've been perfect. I'm a first-term board member, and I became president with really no precedent for functionality in central office or on the board. But I'm committed to this work, and if reelected, I will continue to fight for our kids and to make our schools the type of schools that everyone in these towns moved here for. Because we want our schools to live up to the values of our towns, to be not just inclusive, but to actually be examples of what equity truly is, which is not a zero-sum game, and it's not win-lose, and it's not a redistribution of resources. It's actually growing the pie and growing the wealth for all of our children. So if I'm reelected, and I do ask for your support and support from my running mate, Robin Baker, there are 3 issues that are intertwined and which I will continue to focus on. The first is that we must ensure educational opportunity for every single child, and that has to begin with focusing on the needs of students of color who've been held back for far too long, students with disabilities, where our special education department has not met their needs, forcing many out of district, and many other students who are falling through the cracks or otherwise vulnerable. At the board level, I've fought for policies to advance the rights of these students, and I've driven the work. I have fought to improve school climate. That's the second area of major focus, and that's the welcome, that's the caring, that's the bias. And I'm focusing on facilities, which we'll hear about tonight, because facilities and integration and investment in our children are as integral to the work as climate, curriculum, and opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin Baker could not attend tonight, but she did ask if she could have someone speak for her. And so Robin Rhodes will speak for Robin Baker.
Good evening. I want to first thank you all for taking your time out to be here, and it just really shows that you care what's going on in your community. I was a little surprised when Robin asked me to speak for her, because I don't like speaking in front of people, so I hope I do her speech justice. But remember, these are Robin's words, not mine. I've served on the board before, and I served with Robin. I know her well as a person, and I intend to wholeheartedly support her bid for candidacy. I'm going to read this to you, and please, as I'm reading, and I use the word I, the I is Robin Baker, not Robin Rhodes, okay? Okay. I have lived in South Orange since 1994 and have seen the best and the worst that the South Orange Maplewood School District has to offer. My daughter benefited from the excellent preparation she received in our district. It enabled her to fulfill her dream of attending Stanford University, one of the top schools in the nation. However, many of her classmates were not as fortunate. It is no secret that our district does not always serve all children, but I know that we can. I earned my MBA as a graduate assistant right down the road at Seton Hall University. My professional background is in finance and strategic planning with a heavy dose of process improvement in Fortune 50 companies, as well as not-for-profits and most recently as an independent consultant. Through the years, I have worked in many volunteer roles in our district, including fundraising, co-VP for Columbia High School Music Parents Association, trustee, treasurer, and the tutor for the Achieve Foundation, member of the South Mountain YMCA Board of Managers, member of the Citizens Budget Advisory Committee, and much more. I also served on the Board of Ed from 1998 to 2001. Back then, we developed the Seth Boyden Demonstration School, not a panacea, but a great start in its day. We can do things like this and much, much more. I am running again, so many years later, because it is my hope and plan that every student will have the opportunity to pursue his or her aspirations with the full backing and support of a learning environment that encourages excellence and provides a realistic and attainable path to high achievement. I know that all of our students are capable. The question is only whether we adults will do what is required of us in our various roles to successfully reach each child, bringing out the best of every student, the best of what they have to offer. The diversity of our community results in a broad spectrum of needs, competing for funds and practical attention. During my time on the board in the late 1990s, I witnessed how diverse views can result in polarization, or with the right leadership and effective management, can produce creative, effective solutions that serve all students well. High-performing, well-run schools are essential to healthy, productive communities. For our district in particular, many issues loom around establishing the best and most efficient path for raising the achievement levels of all students within the context of very tight budgets and a dearth of classroom space. Educational outcomes that are both superb and equitable are absolutely possible, but they are not a given. They require policy decisions that are informed by facts and best practices and skillfully implemented. Making that happen requires determined, thoughtful leadership and can ultimately succeed only through the hard work of a committed staff and a cohesive community support. Our Board of Ed needs to lead in a way that brings the entire community together behind efforts to ensure that all of our students are fully prepared for the next step in life when they graduate from Columbia High School. I know how contentious all of our discussions can be. Yes, we need to debate the issues, but we also need to reach agreement and act. As I did during my last term on the Board of Education, I will work to bridge the many divides in our community and build consensus around the steps we must take if all our children are to realize their full potential. I appreciate living in this community where people care enough to really think about and evaluate each candidate before making their choices to fill these very important roles. Here's what I would like you to take away about my position tonight as you go through the evaluation process. First, there's no single issue that is important, but there are three I believe are interdependent and must be addressed together to raise our district to the level where we affect lasting change and accomplish our goal to reach and serve every child with excellence. Those issues are equity, budgetary constraints, and attitudes.
Thank you. But you're welcome. Our next speaker is Shannon. Shannon Carter.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Good evening. I'm Shannon Cuddle. First, I want to say thank you to the Hilton Neighborhood Association for this evening. Thank you all for being here tonight and spending your Thursday evening with us. And I also want to say thank you to all of my fellow candidates that are up here at the table with me. It's no easy task to put yourself out there and stand up for what you believe in, so I also want to acknowledge that as well. So I'm hoping to approach this as a community dialogue with you this evening. I'm a community organizer by heart. So a little bit about myself is, my passion and my work is education and building inclusive, safer schools and spaces for all students to thrive inside and outside of the classroom. And for the past 20 years, I've devoted myself to actually doing that and making actionable goals and actions, making sure that spaces and schools have things that they need to really create environments for all student learning. I came and started from an education background in the classrooms of Detroit. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, and so I'm well vested in making sure of how to really get into the scenes behind a school that doesn't really have a lot to work with and having to do with a lot of budget constraints. From there, I became a school administrator and got involved in doing education policy, which led me to Washington, D.C. In Washington, D.C., I had the privilege to be able to help create and co-author the D.C. Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights, which is the most comprehensive citywide anti-bullying bill in the country, and create the Office of Safe Schools under Mayor Vincent Gray in the District of Columbia. I also was very privileged to be an advisor to the Congressional Anti-Bullying Caucus and also a member of the Federal Safe Schools Roundtable, and be at the table with members of the Obama administration as we discuss best practices with things including advising on issues such as Title IX guidance for public school districts, colleges, and universities across the country. That started within 2010, 2011, interpreting, making sure that we were creating inclusive classrooms across the country. And from my time in Washington, D.C., I was able to work also with doing best practices, curriculum development, and training with school districts across the country and advising on best practices, not only working with marginalized student populations, anti-bias, LGBT youth, students of color, but also breaking down areas of where we needed better parent communication, making sure that curriculum and classrooms and teachers, all the way up and down the education food train, had the support systems they needed. And then I found my way up to New Jersey, where I was recruited by Stephen Goldstein, founder of Garden State Equality, to help implement the New Jersey Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights and also continue doing educational policy on a statewide level in Trenton. So one of the reasons why I'm running here is that somebody who's been a resident of 5 years. I live in Maplewood. Behind the scenes, I've taken my skills and talents that I use across the country for other school districts and have applied them here behind the scenes to support students and families. And one of the ways that I've been doing that is being able to give best practices, resources, and information, but also be a sounding board. And I've heard from parents and families across our district about needs and wants and things that have been happening. 3 areas I see that are needing improvement are climate and culture, access and equity, and also infrastructure. And for me, climate and culture is something that I've been talking about for years and is a basis on my work of creating inclusive, safer schools. Climate and culture includes not just building better access to educational opportunities for all students, but also that includes leadership and development opportunities for teachers and also school administrators, but also at the same time looking at our district and what's working and not working. The whole climate and culture of our district is how our students are going to be successful to thrive inside and outside of the classroom, and we have to make that a priority. And we have to be able to incorporate within our climate and culture what our mission, vision, and our values are as a school district. What do we expect from ourselves, our students, and our community? It is intersectional, and it is all related and connected together. We all have a part to play for our students to thrive inside and outside of the classroom. These are all of our students, these are all of our kids. Their successes are our successes, their failures are our failures. And we need to work on that and do better. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Felicia George.
No problem. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Felicia George. I graduated from Columbia class of 2012. My reason for running is merely based off of my experience in the district. I was in all level 2 classes in Columbia until I had one writing class, which was level 3. In my level 2 classes, I got D's, I got F's, I wasn't paying attention, I wasn't a model student until that level 3 class that brought me to my potential, that really shaped me, informed me. I had a teacher that was just on me all the time, making sure that I was doing what I was supposed to do. And I could tell the difference between her expectations and the level 2 class expectations. They didn't care as much. It wasn't as important. Education wasn't first for them. It was, we just have to do what we have to do in class. Class is 40 minutes long. I'm gonna make sure that you guys are doing something on a piece of paper, and then when it's done, it's done. And when my level 3 class comes in, it'll be different. And I'm here to attest that that is a truth. That is what happens in our district, and we need to make sure that's not something that is being repeated. I have been told by deans that I will not see the light of graduation. I've been told by teachers that there's no need to teach me. I graduated from Columbia without knowledge, no clue. And I'm sitting here in front of you today to tell you that we can no longer treat students that way. It's not okay, it's not acceptable. I graduated with no idea where I was gonna go to college. And when I tell you guys that's frustrating, and I'm speaking from the heart because that's what we need to apply to this. It doesn't always have to be the script. It doesn't always have to be something that's written down and that is repeated in your head and then said out loud. It has to come from somewhere that's serious, somewhere that's appreciated. I'm telling you now, when I graduated, I had no clue what I would do. Nothing. I did not know. So I'm sitting here today for those students. I went to Columbia today to talk to a prior teacher. And I met a young black student, and she had so much fire. And she said, we had an assembly, I tried to talk to Ramos, and he wouldn't listen. I tried to express to him what was going on. I tried to tell him all of my classes were filled with black people, and he had no answer for me. And I'm telling you, it's because we are in a system that is built not to help us, but to work against us. If we do not have people sitting at a table that is here to take that system and say, this is what's wrong, and I'm not leaving until we change it, then we're not going to receive the change. We're not going to see our classes merge. We're still gonna have segregation. There's still gonna be access and equity problems. So I'm sitting here to tell you, I will make sure that students have the proper training with their teachers, to make sure that teachers are teaching them efficiently, teaching them for their mind and not just for a whole class. Because it's important that teachers focus on each and every student and not just the class as a whole. Students learn differently, and it's a teacher's job to make sure that that's what's happening. Also, in our facilities, I know a young woman in South Orange Middle School who told me that she doesn't know what water fountain she can drink out of, because some are okay and some are not. So if this child leaves with lead poisoning, that's on us. And we need to really make sure that our facilities are safe enough for our students to be there every single day. Classes are falling apart. It's too much heat in some classes are too cold. Until you walk into these buildings and you understand what's going on and you talk to students, you won't know. And we can't sit here at a table and read policies and have agreements that are not working for them. We have people on a board that are saying we have policies, but there's no steps taken to make sure that students are in level 4 classes. There's no steps being taken to make sure that kids are in honors classes. There are none. We see that from the data. It's written down. It's nothing that we need to think about. It's a fact. So we need to start making the actual steps to make sure that these kids are getting the education that they deserve. And lastly, I just want to say that for me, it's 1,000% about the students. There's no personal agenda. I'm 22 years old. I'm a young black female, and I'm here for the students. And I'm not going to stop. So if I don't get voted on, that's okay, because I'm still necessary in this town, and I will still do my part. Thank you.
And Avery Julian next, please.
Everybody hear me all right? Yes. Okay. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to give you all my condolences for losing a friend and a association member. My name's Avery Julian. I just graduated Columbia High School this past June, class of 2017. I accompanied Felicia today, going back to Columbia High School to talk to a couple teachers and students. The main reason I'm running, I guess one of the best ways to contextualize it now is I had a conversation with two of my close friends this past week. We talked about, how Columbia has so much potential, how the high school is such a great place, but just the way it is right now, it's stifling that potential. It's literally throwing it out. We talked about how, there was, at one point in time, students the community members could bring their cars to the parking lot behind the gym, so students can learn how to work on cars and get, some type of auto mechanic from familiarity. That's gone now. We have in this community the greatest thing in the world, which is fantastic, imaginative, innovative youth that will stand up and fight for what they believe in. I can attest to that as me sitting in this chair right now, Felicia to my right. Both of us recently graduated from Columbia High School, and I want to actively change what we went through. I think that's one of the most beautiful things in the world. And the current board, their 3 years have gone past when they actively decided, okay, let's try to change these things, and nothing has been changed. The OCR climb has just been, literally, they haven't done it. We have, the data that was released Monday night showed the factor of segregation in our community, in our school district. What are they gonna change now? Because there's attention on it, now they wanna say, okay, we can do this right, we can do this, we can do that. But what about the past 3 years? What about the past 3 years where a lot of students of color, the majority, all students of color have been let down? Well, those two friends that I had that conversation with, they're no longer continuing their post-secondary education. They decided to let college go because they didn't feel prepared. They can't afford it now. What if they were in the right classes with the right teachers? They got the right scholarships. They understood that their education is integral to their survival, to their life, instead of trying to figure out another means to get it. That's the reality that a lot of people do not understand. People that sat on that board for the past 2 years will not and can never understand because they have not gone through it. I personally walked through it. I got out. I want to change it. I don't need my whole 5 minutes.
Thank you. Now, Anthony.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you to the HNA for hosting this once again. It's good to be back. Well, I too believe that we're at a tipping point in our district. 4 superintendents in the past 5 years. Never mind a lot of the things that it's going to be apparent that we don't agree upon. I think we can all agree that this alone is a huge problem. Something has not been working. It's crucial we get this next hire right. I'm hoping this evening, as opposed to our last few forums, we'll have an opportunity to really embrace a substantive debate, even if it's a little uncomfortable, about our inadequacies and our deficiencies in district as we see them in order to move forward together in the right direction. So the most important job of the Board of Education is to identify, hire, and evaluate the superintendent. We're going to hear the name Dr. Thomas Ficar a few times tonight, our interim superintendent. He's been doing a good job this far, mostly because, in my opinion, he does have a keen managerial mind from the outside looking in. Most of his work has been cleaning up a mess that's been left behind from the last 3 years from a name you will not hear too often this evening, and that is Dr. John Ramos, our last superintendent. We can't talk about one without clearly talking about the other this evening if we are going to move forward. Now, I believe a good amount of the mess was avoidable this past few years. I've spoken out, I've written about it a few times. How do I know this? Mostly because I'm a former educator and administrator in this very district. I have an extremely clear idea about how certain processes and mechanisms work and don't work, and how they've been left unattended for far too long. When the current board is, in some cases, voting to reverse some of the very things they voted on 1 or 2 short years ago, we can see that there may be a lack of a depth of collective knowledge on the board that can prevent us from effectively evaluating and hiring our next superintendent. Again, it is a crucial hire at a crucial time. So tonight I'm clearly seeking to differentiate myself in a few ways from the other candidates. And first, I'm a product of our schools here. I, along with many of my classmates, had a multi-dimensional educational experience here. I developed a strength and a passion for music, if you haven't heard, and was lucky enough to have that passion celebrated by our schools. It led me to become a performer at a very high level and receive a Grammy nomination for Educator of the Year. By the way, my academic experience did allow me to have the skills to run a college, a nonprofit, manage budgets, facilitate capital projects, etc., and most importantly, give back to this very district where I graduated as an administrator. I want all of our children to have the opportunities I had. I'm proud my children are growing up here, I really am, but I am really worried about our educational landscape, and it's changed for the worse. And the educational options are few and far between for your children. We need a more balanced board to negotiate this educational landscape. Second, I'm an educational leader. I know the structures of our system pretty well. I've sat back oftentimes disappointed at the board's lack of attention to deficiencies and lack of basic administrative acumen in our district for the last 3 years. It does start at the top. Our last superintendent, in my opinion, was completely not equipped with the skills necessary to run a school district. In his 2 years here, he was rarely held accountable for issues regarding leadership, curriculum, and instruction, which I would like to talk about, attention to pressing buildings and grounds issues, Office of Civil Rights complaints, communication, basic attention to day-to-day supervision of our administration, which resulted in a mass exodus of a lot of my colleagues a couple of years ago. The trickle-down effects have been troubling. You don't have to look very hard to see that our interns saw this dysfunction 2 short months here. You can look closely at the personnel moves and the massive restructuring that's going on. This is long overdue. We do need a more balanced board in order to effectively evaluate the one employee in our purview, the superintendent. So while we do discuss a lot of the things we haven't done well, I do want to let you know I am very optimistic. I always have been. I believe you can love something and be highly critical of it at the same time. And I do believe that we learn a lot from arguing with one another. What hasn't been so acceptable to me is see on one hand the enormous potential our district has, which I've heard Avery talk about, and how we're so close to doing so many wonderful and beautiful things here, and on the other hand, how we have sat back and we've let things go so far wrong for so long because our administration has not been held to account by our board enough, the way our teachers and our students are held accountable for so much every single day. So I think it's time for us to do something different. I hope we really have a chance to talk about that tonight. It's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheila, should we?
I wanted to thank you all for coming tonight and for the Hilton Association for having this very important forum. My name is Sheila Shidia. I'm a South Orange resident. I've been so for 3 years. I have 2 children attending Soma School, one at Jefferson and one at the high school. I was a founding board member of Linden Tree Preschool in Cabo Hill, Brooklyn. I'm a former PTA member and communications VP at PS 321 in Brooklyn, and was also a co-chair of the diversity committee there. I've always been involved as much as I possibly can in my child's education, in my children, there's 2 of them, education. My career as an artist liaison and marketing executive and entrepreneur, I've run 2 marketing companies, have also given me the tools to identify, plan, and execute innovative communication measures that ensure transparent and clear messaging. And that's really one of the reasons that I chose to run for the board. This year, I found to be a distance in what was happening in the administration and the information that the students and the family were receiving. In addition to communication, I've been troubled by the lack of transparency in curriculum implementation and curriculum stability, and definitely the lack in provision of an equitable education program for all the students in our community. I'm a first-generation Iranian American who grew up in the Midwest, where being Middle Eastern was not always welcome. I had to make a decision at a young age to defend my culture and begin my journey of self-advocacy and allyship. This led me to New York City, where as a young adult, and for the past 3 years, I've been completing coursework towards a degree, a master's in music therapy, where I focused on children with special needs, learning in this work, in my field work, that state mandates can fall short of meeting the needs of students, making it vital to work as an advocate for all children in our public school system. And today I stand firm knowing it's not solely the responsibility of a marginalized people to solve all the causes of the aggressions brought onto them. The lack of movement on the access and equity policy left me wondering who is benefiting when half of our students are underserved. As a member of the BOE, I would make this discovery a priority and push for true access and equity in our schools. In addition to that, another really big issue I had as a parent was when we moved to town, our oldest child was entering middle school. And in the 3 years we were in middle school, we watched the curriculum change 3 times, from International Baccalaureate to Common Core testing focus to what is now Access and Equity. And I didn't hear a word about it. I didn't hear a word that the curriculum was changing. I wasn't told what I could do to prepare my child. It was all just, I was kind of felt like I was left in the dark, and the students felt the same way from what I heard in my living room day to day. Today I stand firm knowing that, and I found out that this discussion is not new, that this discussion has been a part of the public discourse in these 2 towns for the past 20 years. So as a member of the BOE, I would find where we can align with these state mandates as we need to, while moving forward and creating a progressive and stabilized curriculum that challenges our students while providing clear and accessible assistance when it's needed. Our students should not have to jump through hoops to figure out what they need to do to succeed. Really, I believe, when I moved here, I found this to be such an ideal place, and I still do believe we've been given a gift in these 2 towns that were provided by the efforts of previous generations that put in the hard work that made this district appealing to so many. And a testament to this are the 2 recent graduates that here to our right, that they're running for office in their hometown. It shows tenacity, that leadership and service to the community, which is really what we want our students to graduate with. I care deeply about education and the opportunities it provides. I want all our children to have that equal opportunity.
Thank you. And last but not least, Donna Smith.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you to the Hilton Neighborhood Association for hosting this forum once again, and thank you all for coming to hear about our views. My husband and I moved to South Orange over 25 years ago. Our 3 boys all attended South Orange Maplewood schools and all graduated from Columbia High School. I am a customs and international trade lawyer, working part-time for a boutique law firm in New York City, and I'm also an adjunct professor at Brooklyn Law School. After years of being involved in the district, including various PTA and HSA positions, co-president of President's Council, participation on the last strategic planning process for the district, and advocating on numerous occasions for challenging coursework for all students, I chose to run for the Board of Ed in 2014. While I've been on the board, I've been a member of the Policy and Monitoring Committee and the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee. I was also on the Negotiations Committee the last time around when we were negotiating with SUMEA, and this year I am chair of the Personnel and Labor Relations Committee, so negotiating once again. I think I'm probably one of the hardest working board members on the board. There are several, and I think I include myself in that group. And I would like to continue with that work for another 3 years to carry through on some of the things that we have managed to accomplish during my tenure. Here are some of my top priorities. Access and equity. I define equity as believing that each child has the capacity to be successful, ensuring that we empower our student learners and provide them with what they need to succeed. This includes a rigorous curriculum, effective supports, a climate that supports learning, and adults who create that climate. This is why I enthusiastically voted for the development and passage of the Access and Equity Policy and the Strategic Direction, which focuses on meeting the needs of individual learners at the pace and depth of learning that is right for them. I recognize that implementation of the Access and Equity Policy has been rough, and that we have issues remaining that must be addressed, including providing the most flexibility for students to be able to move up or down levels, figuring out why for some courses African American students have chosen to move up, but for others there was no perceivable movement, and more. We need to examine whether students haven't been given appropriate advice regarding their choices, and if not, the administration must fix the way that guidance and teaching staff assist students in course selection. If that is not the problem, or is only part of the problem, then more effort simply must be made to guide and support students with their choices, particularly in the transition years from fifth to sixth grade and 8th to 9th. I also think we need to look at across-the-board elimination of level 2 classes, which are really a path to nowhere, as Felicia has already said. The future of learning and teaching following the strategic direction will consist of individual pathways that are supported by an array of choices for educational programming and teachers who are specifically trained to provide instruction to a range of students' needs and pacing. In the future state of how we deliver teaching and learning in our district, I believe there is space for levels as a means of choice, not as a gate to deny students access to a rich curriculum. My second top priority, and there's so many priorities, but we have to limit ourselves tonight, is the state of the facilities. This is going to be one of the biggest challenges that we face in the coming year, from overcrowding to aging buildings and to out-of-date classroom setups. We need a facilities plan that will finally take care of a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance throughout the school district. We also need to address the matter of increased student populations, particularly in the elementary schools. The demographer estimates a need for 26 additional classrooms. That's a lot at the elementary level, and has noted that the portables in many cases are close to reaching their shelf life. I just happened to visit one of the portables and I can attest to that. Moreover, the socioeconomic disparities between the various elementary schools and de facto segregation also must be addressed while we look for more classroom space. The administration will need to bring forth recommendations quickly for board consideration, whether to build a new building, add on to existing buildings, change the school zones, and/or pair schools. And I'll leave that for now and just say my third top priority is supporting diverse learners, and that means supporting all types of learners, from high achievers to low achievers to special ed students to gifted and talented students, all learners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we will turn to our audience for questions and answers from our candidates. Please, if you have a question, ask it, and don't make a speech because we want to move along. You can direct it at a candidate, or a candidate after that can ask to respond also. And we each would have 2 minutes. Okay, is there anyone with a question in the audience?
It's time to go home. I wanted to ask Felicia, what is it that allowed you not to get motivated in the district until the past year or 2?
Well, I wasn't in the district for a while. I was living in California. And I would say that's where I found myself when I was in school, and I was just like, I do not have the tools. I don't have what's necessary for me.
Your confidence level was not.
It wasn't at all.
Yeah.
Educationally, it wasn't.
Right.
And fortunately, I was going to school for acting, so I didn't have the normal college classes. So I realized that I needed to find my educational self before I could be creative. Before I could really express myself, I needed to find myself educationally. So I left school and I taught myself. I read books, I spoke to old teachers, I did whatever I could to get my education level up. And then once I did, I realized this is still happening in the town. Kids are still graduating and they have no clue of who they are educationally. And as a student, that's important. When we graduate from high school, it's important to know who you are educationally.
Was there a group of people anywhere in the school that you could connect with to get going?
If there was, I didn't know about
You
it.
didn't know about, not the dance group, not the band?
I was a part of the MLK, but at the time it wasn't
Yeah, MLK was great, that choir.
the Martin Luther King, it wasn't,
Yeah.
as big as it should have.
Yeah, it was a wonderful, that choir came and performed for us a number of times. We made connections a lot.
Yeah,
It's a wonderful way to get motivated to be in school.
definitely.
Thank you.
No problem.
May I
Thank
also
you.
respond to that? I think another big part of the lack of motivation is it's taught. It's not necessarily something that is harbored in the student by itself. Like Felicia just said, like our current climate in the school forces a lot of students, especially students of color, to be autodidactic and teaching themselves. That's because in the classroom they're taught that they're not supposed to be there. There's the gigantic push-out initiative. There's this way of teaching that is very existent in our district that is, if you're a student of color, you don't act a certain way. You don't belong in this you don't belong in this level. You don't belong here. You don't belong there. And this idea that your school isn't your school.
Okay, thank you. Another question?
As a follow-up on that same topic, do you think that this exists at the elementary level as well, or is it just this separation nurtured more in the high school, or do you think it exists at all the levels of education?
I think it's ever present in our district. It's everywhere. It has to start somewhere, and it starts at the youngest possible age. It's something that's literally built into the way of learning for a lot of people of color in this district. So it begins in the elementary school. The factor begins right there at the beginning.
Okay, Elizabeth, I wanted to add something.
Sure. I actually, can you hear me? I actually believe that it is at every level in our district. I think it begins with the problems that families have just registering for kindergarten. That's why we pushed and why I pushed very hard, if anyone saw the June board meeting, to force the administration to bring registration to the Boyden community, to the Hilton community, so that families that didn't have access to transportation and families who couldn't take a weekday off from work would have the ability to register their child for school. So I think how we welcome families before their child is actually walking in the door makes a big difference, and whether we're welcoming and accommodating and embracing and providing information or we're not, that sets wheels in motion. I became involved in my daughter's elementary school because as a parent, I didn't feel respected. I didn't feel that there was partnership at the school level in terms of the climate. And I could see that families around me, families who had less economic opportunity, families who didn't have the free ability to take off a day to come advocate during the day for their child, families who weren't advocates, didn't have the same opportunity. And I became involved in my elementary school to open up that space, to make sure that all parents could get the information that they needed, to make sure that parents and students were welcome, and to actually start talking about the climate in classrooms. My first PTA meeting in second grade was about mean girl and bullying behavior in the classroom, and what was our school doing about it, and why couldn't parents get more information. So I think it absolutely begins at elementary school and prior to elementary school.
Okay. Avery has asked to say something.
I'd like to add to what I said earlier. There's also kind of a difference in where it is in the district. For example, at the elementary level, it's in the actual school facility. The majority of black students in the district go to South Boyden, while others go to Jefferson or Clinton or to South Mountain. Also, but when we get to the high school, that's when it's more implicated in the actual leveling system, where you have the majority of black students in level 2s and college prep.
I'll also state, when my nephew was in Clinton, we ended up taking him out, but when he was in Clinton, the teacher told him he had nappy hair. And that definitely registered with him in a way where he didn't even want to be in class. And when he was in class, he didn't want to raise his hand because he didn't want to cause too much attention to himself, as well as being told he had the poor lunch because he didn't have money in his account, where I had to come and bring Subway and eat and have lunch with him so he could feel like, maybe I don't have the poor lunch. Maybe I do fit in like everyone else. But when you treat children like that, it starts a process in their own mind that's like, I don't want to speak, or I don't want to be seen, and I want to fall behind. I want to be in the shadows, because it's embarrassing, regardless of how old you are, what grade you're in. It's embarrassing to be told you're not good enough. So it definitely is in the elementary schools as well.
We can all.
Okay, Tony, Anthony?
This is already more informative than our other forums, so thanks for that. We actually just had a conversation.
Yeah.
I just want to add to this something that I think I'd like everybody at least to think about. And it's this idea that, to what Felicia's talking about, we give a lot of lip service to it, but we don't value all modes of intelligence, K through 12, in our system right now. We don't celebrate it, and we see it in the dearth of offering in our curriculum. You know, Avery was saying we live in this rich, diverse ecosystem, but our schools are not a reflection of that. And so how do we translate into policy the idea that human life is diverse, we're creative, and we grow organically, and our system is based on conformity, compliance, and linearity. We have to address that while we address everything else. Otherwise, we have this narrow set of values and this one pathway that everybody seems to think is the only pathway, and we don't see the beauty in everybody else. And I just need to continue to want to give a voice to that.
Can I answer as well?
Okay,
Is that okay? Do you mind?
and then we'll go to,
Okay. So I just want to say, so I do agree that it's definitely, it starts as soon as we enter kindergarten. Where students, I would say even entering preschool within the climate and culture of our community within the school district. So I have heard, as someone who's been an advocate behind the scenes, I've heard from students like Avery and Felicia, I've heard from students in elementary, middle, and the high school. I've heard from parents and families saying, Shannon, what do we do? Shannon, I don't have the tools to talk to my teacher. I've heard from my teacher is not supporting the needs of my student, where there's been blatant inherent racism, institutional racism, and bias that's been in various capacities, K through 12. And I've also heard on the other side with student leaders, such as our student board liaison, Philip from last year, who quite often would, came to me asking for advice and support, saying, hey Shannon, there are things going on that I don't know what to do, or the tools where I'm trying to talk to, the superintendent, and I'm not really getting my message across, or we really want to do an assembly and bring students together, and it's not really happening in the best way. What do we do? What advice do you have? So I have heard challenges since I stepped in this community day one, and it is there. It is there. I even heard 3 days ago about an incident that happened where there was a family in need. So I do think that it's there. We have to acknowledge that. We have to talk about it. And at the same time, I think that it's on us to make sure that we're actually talking to the students and asking them what their needs are, what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and talking with parents in the community so we have a clearer and more concise understanding of what exactly is happening day to day.
So, good afternoon.
could you stand,
My name is
please?
Idris.
Could you stand up?
Can I stand up? I have a comment and I guess also a question. So, my son, he had a hard time when he started here at Toscan. I always knew that there was a problem. I identified a problem with my son. And I spoke to the kindergarten teacher, and I said, I think there's a problem with my son, I don't know what it is. Then again, first grade, second grade, and until I actually, at that time, Elizabeth was involved in the PTA, and until I spoke to her, and I said, I don't know what exactly I need to do. She actually guided me through, this assessment, this, that. And that's until I got my son kind of the help that he needed. And it was until actually 4th grade that he was getting the tools that he was supposed to be getting, since like back then in kindergarten. So, I don't really feel that the teachers, they do what they can. I think that they do a great job. I'm not going to say, no, my sister's a teacher, and, I know that they try to do the best that they can, right? So it's not just on the teacher's responsibility, it's also on our part. What they say, we are the best advocates for our own kids, right? So anyway, my question is, now going to middle school, they never told me that my son has a, what's that called, the PI or whatever that is called. Yeah. And I never know, to be honest, that my son can still take honor classes. Like, I didn't know. The teachers in Toscan, they never say, well, do you know that he could actually go on honor classes? Until I went to middle school and I was talking to the counselor and I said, I want to meet it now. I don't want to meet it like when my son is failing, right? And I said, well, how come my son is not, offered any honor classes? And they were like, well, they didn't tell you before. So I'm like, well, I feel that, how come these teachers are not prepared to identify?
Could you ask a question?
Sure. So what's your program or your goal or for special education? Like, where do you see? I mean, you guys spoke very well. I appreciate all the feedback, but I didn't hear like specifics on special education.
Did you want to direct that to anyone in particular?
Anyone that
Does
can
anyone
answer.
want to respond? Oh, wait, Elizabeth,
I'm
and
sorry.
then, I'm sorry.
Sheila can go first, it's fine.
I don't know about speaking directly to the issue that you have and the steps you would need to take as your son enters middle school, but I do believe, and I hear in what you're saying, that there is a lack of communication from the school to the families. So there should be on a school website, sent to homes, in 2 or 3 ways that should always be communicated every year. If you see an issue, these are the steps you should take. It should be very clear so parents don't have to guess. I actually called the communications director in the administration today because I was looking for something on the website that I could not find. And I said, this happens to me often. And I said, this information that I am looking for, the page is there, but it says it has not been updated since 2012. Who can I go to? Who is in charge of this? And who can I go to? And the response was, well, what do you need to know? And I said, no, I just need to know who's responsible. So as these questions come up, I have a path. I can say, oh, I can email this person, or oh, I can go to this place. So I think that with a number of issues that parents have on a day-to-day basis as they're trying to do their best to be advocate for their kids, there should be an easy path towards the information. And I think that's like a good 70% of the battle, is just knowing where to go, who to talk to, so that you can be that true advocate.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I think,
wait. So first of all, Sheila, I want to ask you to look back at the website. There's a tab on the first page that says who to contact when you have questions, and there's a list of contacts for every single type of question, whether it's your school, whether it's special education, whether it's the business office, whether it's a curriculum question, including all the curriculum supervisors. And we did that so that every parent had one-stop shopping, and I drove that this past summer. So, and Dr. Ficari, so I'm sorry. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that there actually is a guide, and the website is under development, which is also why we brought in an IT director who was appointed on Monday. But I want to respond to the special education question because I've worked very hard to improve the quality of intervention and support services for students with disabilities, and that's not just students who are officially classified with IEPs. Early identification and intervention is key. Not every child with a learning disability is going to need an IEP, but if we don't provide the interventions early on and recognize the problem and recognize that children can have a disability and have incredible potential, we're not going to actually service the child and support the child. early on. Teachers need to be trained to recognize it, administrators need to own it, and administrators need to resource the child as soon as there's any question from the parent or the teacher that there's an issue. We have to make sure that every parent in our district knows what their rights are and knows what their child's rights are. That's why I wrote the Section 504 policy which we adopted last year. And this year, every parent who has a Section 504 plan for their child or an IEP is receiving a statement of their rights. The rights to meet with the counselors at the school, the rights to revise the plan, the rights to services. Knowing what your rights are in a timely way is key. Knowing who to go to in a timely way is key. As a result of the Section 504 policy, we now have on our website the identity, the contact information of every administrator in every single school who's responsible for providing intervention and referral services, as well as 504 referrals and IEP referrals. So these are some of the components, but recognizing that children can have disabilities and incredible potential, and ensuring that they actually meet that potential is fundamental, and that's a mindset shift that we're driving home.
Can I reply to that question as well?
Did you want to answer?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And then back to
I heard Ms. Baker talk a lot about the policy she wrote. However, I think one of the most integral steps is working with the actual parents that have these special needs children in the district, working with CPAC. Ms. Periota, she introduced herself to me at the first forum we had, and she asked that we exchange emails. And I told her I'd rather meet with you in person, sit down and have the actual discussion about what the issues are. Because to be honest with you, I'm ignorant to them right now. I think it'd be better if a majority of the board members admitted when they were ignorant to things instead of trying to act like they knew a lot about something they know nothing about. I feel like the only way for progression is to sit down with the people that you need to help, learn about them, learn about what their issues are, understand exactly what is wrong with the policy in the first place, and then change it. Thank you.
okay.
Hi. So Shannon, this question is directed to you, since you spoke about developing the HIV policies. What I think someone's oh, I'm sorry. What I wanted to ask you is that it seems that the HIV policies here in this district is unfairly applied to African boys. And I want you to speak on how you can re-educate the district on making it a fairer policy.
Thank you for your question. So based upon some of the data that has recently come out, it does show that there are definitely areas where we see discrepancies and different disenfranchisement of students of color that have been reported with experiencing HIV. And that is a very strong concern. So even in our district, though, where we graded ourselves recently, we have to do a self-grading report, right? So we gave ourselves 85%, like a B plus. But we also admitted that we needed to do some strengthening. We also said that we needed, in that report, that we needed to have better training, better monitoring systems put in place. We also needed to make sure that we were adhering to policies and procedures that we implemented and created that are attached to the state of New Jersey law. So that being said, there are a lot of ways that we can make room to really kind of tackle this issue head on. I've been outspoken about the fact that I do not care for the full breadth of the state of New Jersey anti-bullying Bill of Rights. I've currently been speaking with lawmakers for some time about looking and revisiting that. In Trenton, and then here locally behind the scenes, for us to be able to revisit our HIV policies as a whole, and making sure that we're adhering to best practices, and also having an in-depth look at our training in regards of doing HIV. And HIV again is New Jersey's acronym for harassment, intimidation, and bullying. Yeah, that's a New Jersey term. Yeah. But there are definitely ways that we can do that, and I think the first thing we need to do is revisit and look at the policies, because right now it's the HIV policy in of itself is being implemented many different ways across our school community based upon interpretation of what that looks like. And I think the district has recently in that data said that they've acknowledged that that's the case, and I'd like to see an action plan to move forward.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
So the district, as Ms. Cuddle, as Shannon has said, recognized that there were problems with the HIV procedures, and in the past year, we've conducted, well, the administration has conducted more training of staff members, the ones who conduct the investigations, et cetera, on how exactly the HIV policy is to be followed. I'm not a big fan of the New Jersey statute. I think it makes things very difficult for us to make decisions on. However, we are stuck with it at the moment unless things change. The thing that a lot of parents don't realize is that HIV is not meant to be a punishment mechanism. The code of conduct applies to situations where students have violated the code of conduct and then discipline is applied. HIV incidents, the purpose of it is to have restorative practices to get the students into a more comfortable environment where they feel safe. That's the purpose of it. It is not to punish. It is to try to establish good relationships among the students, between those who were bullied and those who do the bullying. And there are very specific characteristics that have to be there in order for it to be considered an HIV complaint. So the difference between HIV and code of conduct is something that a lot of people don't really understand.
Could you repeat one more time what that?
HIV,
Yeah.
harassment, intimidation, and bullying. But it may not necessarily mean what we think of as bullying in all cases. It has to be for a specific characteristic. The law is very specific, and it's a difficult thing to apply.
Can I also respond to that? Sorry.
You want to say something?
Yes, I saw you shaking your head a little bit just now, so I think you understand as well as I do that it is a punishment for a lot of students of color. I think, and your question was how do we remedy that? I think there are a couple ways that we have to do that to facilitate what Donna was talking about and making it something that is, I believe you said something about it being a building restorative for the students as well as, I think we should include students in the cases where the violations are not of criminal intent, that we include students, we include parents, that a lot of people don't realize that their students and their children are being interrogated, that they're not really, they don't have a chance. They're answering questions they don't know that they can't or shouldn't answer. I feel like that's another part of the lack of transparency between the administration and the parents. Thank you.
I'd like to just add on to it, if I can, before we move on to the next question. My senior year, I was actually brought into the dean's office because I stood up for myself in the cafeteria when I was repeatedly told about myself in a way that I won't say out loud because it's ridiculous. But I was brought into the dean's office and yelled at. And that's when everything happened, where I was told I wouldn't graduate and all these other things. And it made me feel like me standing up for myself was not appropriate. It made me feel like I was wrong. And, you know, he told me, well, you raised your voice and you got angry and you got upset. And I said, well, if you were a woman of color and someone spoke to you that way, you'd get upset too. Because there's a fine line between having a disagreement and someone badgering you. And if there's no one there to see that and your voice is not heard, it's frustrating. And I'm telling all of you now that in our schools, there's no one watching for us. There's no one advocating for us. So when these charges are brought up, of course it's going to be brought up on us because we're the ones that are angry for what is happening. But that doesn't mean that we are the bullies. That does not mean that we are the target. That does not mean that we are wrong. It means that we need someone there to be able to say that's not what happened. Someone who's not choosing sides, but someone who's there to actually help and actually listen. My parents weren't even called when that happened. So they had no clue. I'm sitting in the dean's office with 3 deans yelling at me, and at that point I didn't know how I was supposed to respond. I was just responding off of anger, which made the situation worse for me, instead of having a parent with me that said, you know what, Felicia, you're not wrong. We're gonna have to do something about what happened to my child. So if a parent is not included in that process, it's error all over the place. So we need to be careful about how we charge students with these charges if no one's there to actually advocate for them.
Okay, this gentleman.
What is the board's timetable for finding a new superintendent, and what can the board collectively do to ensure more stability and continuity in that office?
if I could,
We'll start with Elizabeth and we'll move down if whoever wants.
okay. So, Dr. Ficara, and I'm glad there's, I think, support for Dr. Ficara's interim superintendency, and I'm very proud that I led the search for Dr. Ficara and actively recruited him to come to our district. As a retired superintendent, he can serve here for up to 2 years. The board, as the full entity, right, no one board member will make a decision for the board, so as 9 members, the board will have to decide when to formally start the search for the permanent superintendent. Personally, I think we have the opportunity here with Dr. Ficara, with the 20-plus years of superintendency that he has under our belt, to actually not only improve the district administratively, operationally, and financially, and get the facilities work. But Dr. Ficara has already spoken out quite firmly about what he's going to do with our curriculum and what he's going to do in terms of equity, and that's why we brought him here. So the permanent superintendent search is very resource intensive, and it has to be a process with a lot of community input, and that in itself is a body of work. My personal recommendation would be that we get a full year of Dr. Ficara's service and leadership under our belt, and also recruit the resources we need and the talent we need to the central office, and then go out and use the second year of his superintendency. That was what he did with Hamilton. He had a very successful experience there. That's one of the reasons we brought him here, in addition to his very successful 12 years in Morristown and his commitment to equity. He's doing all the things right now that the board recruited him to do. And so we have to let that work happen while also getting ready for the search, and pick our moment, because with the salary cap now being adjusted, and hopefully it's going to change, as well as the state aid picture change under a new governor, we'll have a moment where I think there'll actually be a greater talent and experience pool in the permanent superintendent market, if we actually use the next year to get ready for that. So I'm optimistic. It's a lot of work. Leading that process and finding the right candidate is a lot of work. I think the potential to do it right is what we've seen in the last 6 months, and I'm very proud of that work.
Well, I have to give some other people a chance. Let's have Robin in the back. Is it Robin?
Have a little bit of an issue. My only concern is that I was on the board in 2000, and the words equity and access were, of course, all over. We talk about them, and it's been 17 years. And I'm hearing the same issues as we were trying to address. I think as I've been here in this community, and my son came out of the school before I went on the board, because I know how this community can be. So hearing the same issues is a little disturbing, because I thought at one time we had made some progress, but really, from what I'm hearing from the 2 young people on the board, we've really gone backwards. And that's really disheartening to me. So as board members, and I mean, we had a seriously, fight to tension and everything else. Board, I mean, and the board members were passionate about what they believed in everything that they were saying. They really did. But I would like to know, because I'm a person who likes to hear about action steps, from at least one action item that you would take on to kind of get the movement towards access. All right. Something serious, one actual thing. Here's the things that I could see that we can tackle, 1, 2, 3, with a couple of steps behind it. Because we have not made progress. And I think some of it concerns me, and hear me out, don't mean to offend anyone, is this community is changing. Again, I'm going to say it just like I would say it, this community is becoming one again. And as that happens, it pushes our minority students further down. It really does. It makes them become a little bit more invisible, and they're not serviced. They don't get into the HP classes. They don't get seen. And it's disheartening to me to hear the people sitting on the board here say what was said to them. I'm a college coach, and I'm going to tell you and what I do is work with college students to make sure that they get in and graduate, get out of college after 4 years. You guys are failing minority students here. They're not prepared. They don't even feel, as young lady here, they don't even feel proud of what they've done. And it's really disheartening. Now,
Can I ask, do you have a question?
my question would be as to one action step that maybe 2 or 3 of you would take What would you champion around? What would you rally around? How can you move us closer to getting where we should have been years ago?
Someone would answer that. Okay, what's the issue?
I think that one of the most glaring issues that we're having in this district are the elementary schools and the distribution of minority students, low-income students in two primary schools. And I think it's a huge issue to tackle, not only in busing, like coming up with a new system like Montclair has, where we bus children around and really try to create a level playing field. But we have to talk about making sure that the curricula in all those schools are equal, so that there isn't one school that has more resources and has the science class and the community garden and nobody else has it. So it's really approaching it in a holistic way to where you get the community involved. You talk to the real estate agents. Say, are you really making sure that when somebody comes to this town, you're showing all the beauty in this town and you're not directing people to one or two places? I know when I came, I was told I loved a house in one area and I was told, you know what, try coming over here. I was like, well, why? I ended up taking the house that I loved and I'm so thrilled with everything, about my neighborhood. But it's a huge holistic question. But I think an action item could be to say, we need to redistribute the students to make sure that the schools all have the same resources and are diverse.
Does anyone else want to?
I'll answer. I can answer that question based off of my experience. When I was a student, I would have liked to have input in what happens to me. I would have liked to be aware of issues. And as you know, I know a lot of students that are still in Columbia, and as I talk to them, they have no clue what's happening. They have no clue about an achievement gap. They have no clue that data is coming back and they're failing tremendously. They have no clue that it's a group and it's not singular. So I think it's important for us to survey students, and not just yes or no, but open-ended for them to be able to respond and say, well, this is happening to me in my class. And there is someone who can sit down and who can look at everything that is happening, because with the technology we have today, the surveys can be online. And for students who are in elementary school, their parents can fill out these surveys. Because I've seen 1,000 times parents come in and want to talk to a teacher, but there's so many parents that want to talk that there's no one there to answer their question. There needs to be a platform for students and for parents to be able to go on and say, this is what's happening to me. This is what happened to me in my second period class. This is what's happening to my child in second grade, and I have no clue what to do about it. Because at the end of the day, we're being left out. And until we're counted in, there's no way to fix it.
Okay, yes. Sorry, names next year.
Yeah, so something that's actionable, I think I agree with Felicia. One thing we have to start is on the ground floor. So we can't build a house without a foundation, and I think we have to go back to the foundation. And with that foundation, we have to look at what's working and not working, and the first thing we need to do is a self-assessment. Ask our students in the communities that are most impacted what their needs are, what we're missing, and what we can do better. And then from there, work out a plan to do better. And I'm talking about doing this K through 12. A second thing that could be actionable to that, moving from an assessment standpoint, is also making sure that we're creating systems and inroads where parents and students have identified somebody within each school community who they can talk to about this issue, whether it be somebody perhaps that could be a diversity and inclusion specialist, somebody who has been appointed to help kind of steer these types of conversations and issues that can almost be like an ombudsman, and then take that forward over towards central office and to the board and extend those issues. And the third thing I would say that would be actionable to that as well is that we have to admit and we have to acknowledge things aren't working in some areas. And when we admit things that are not working in some areas, we can be able to take the first step to then acknowledge that and move forward and take steps that are going to be not just actionable, but make a difference.
Okay, and
May
Elizabeth
I?
wanted to say something.
Tony,
Oh, I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
Sure. And then.
And I think that will be the last question.
yeah.
Okay.
So I want to pick up on what, I would like to pick up on what Shannon said, first of all, about being transparent and being honest. The data that was released on Monday night was not released because it was politically expedient. It was released because it had to be released, because we had to assess where we were, what had changed or had not by virtue of lifting the barriers that were created by policy, and what had not moved because of deeper, long-standing issues in our curriculum, in our instruction, and in our building structures. So, Ms. Rhodes, I absolutely respect the work that your board did in terms of creating the Seth Boyden Demonstration School to make a commitment to integration and opportunity for every child. But what our district has not done for decades now is to actually attack and change the hyper-leveling and micro-leveling that has been in existence in our district for decades. And certainly it goes back to when Tony Mazzocchi was in school, because I know it goes back to when Chris Saban, my colleague on the board, was in school. He said even then there were level 2 classes and you knew that there was a path to nowhere. And so for 30 or 40 years, our community has allowed those classes to exist. Level 2 has been eliminated in 6th, 7th, 8th, and now 9th grade math. I'm hoping that by the end of this year with Dr. Ficarra's leadership, it'll be eliminated in all math classes. But that's not where it stops. We have to create buildings that are accountable and led by a building leader and administrator. For decades, our teachers had 2 bosses. They had their principal on some matters and their department head, including at the math department. That's a lot of the problems. They didn't have to follow the principal's guidance on instruction and on supporting kids. Dr. Ficarra, with full board support, and in fact at the board's request, changed that organizational structure at the beginning of the year so that every teacher in every school reports to the principal. The department heads have to serve the principal, the department heads have to serve the students curricularly. That is absolutely paramount. And the other thing that we as a community have not done, and we excuse ourselves for because of tight budgets, but we have not looked at the economic barriers to access, whether it's a lack of access to pre-K for low-income and working families, particularly here in the Hilton and Boyden area. We have not dealt with that as a district. And we have not, as I think Shannon put it, and also Felicia, we have not looked at the inequities from school to school based on parent resources and the social capital that families with more economic means bring to a school. The Seth Boyden PTA has been Herculean in their efforts to level that playing field and to bring resources, and the board has supported the Seth Boyden parents in that effort. But that's not enough. We actually have to make sure that the district has a plan to support every program in every school, and that we're not allowing barriers to access, whether it's digital access for internet, extracurricular fees for music trips, that multi-$1,000 trips that the music department takes in high school that many children can't even dream to afford, instrument fees that are barriers to entry in 5th and 6th and 7th grade, music classes. We haven't talked about that. We talk about supporting the arts. We have to support the arts for every child. So I think that's the other piece of very deep work that we have to both identify and we have to plan for, no matter what our resource constraints. And I do think that's where the community and actually coordination with our strategic partners to actually bring those resources to the table matters. It's not just the values, but the actual work that we're doing in terms of the structures, the curriculum, and the resources.
Robin, may I ask, I'm sorry, what did you say you were on the board again?
2001.
Okay. I appreciate hearing a lot of what Elizabeth said until she talked about the arts. We've cut those massively here in the last few years and marginalized them more than I've ever seen in this district. But I will say that, speaking of, I just need to talk about the one action item. I heard a lot of really amazing things up here because we actually were able to have a conversation. But when I worked here in district, I was clear to all of the faculty and staff, students and parents that what goes on in the arts, we want going on in all of education. When I came here, about 60 to 70% of students quit a musical instrument after their first year of study. And from that moment, there was a mindset around that, well, I guess, there are the haves and the have-nots. There are talent, kids with talent, and kids without talent. Well, brain science has shown that in all subjects, that's simply not the case. you know, I said, you know, you've done it for 12 hours a year. Of course, you made an animal noise out of your instrument the first time, and you know, the parents thought that it was handed out genetically, that because they weren't talented, now their child isn't talented. What we did was we addressed access to the instruments, because we did have a musical instrument fund here, and I made sure that no child on free or reduced lunch would have to pay for a musical instrument. We addressed the time on task. We switched it from 2 days a week to 5 days a week. And we addressed the curriculum and instruction that went on in that classroom. And we only had 20% of kids quit. All of a sudden, talent abounds, you know? And so that's a mindset issue, and we can learn a lot from that in all of the other subjects here. But the first thing we have to do is offer them and value them as part of a well-rounded education. And we've lost that since 2000, and we've lost that since Robin Baker was on the board before that. We've lost it. We have a one-size-fits-all test-centric approach to education, and I beg you all to take a good look at that, because we're in an educational paradigm that is completely outdated. If we don't address that, we're going to sit here 15 years from now, and we're going to have the same conversation, and that's why I'm running.
Okay, I'm gonna have to call the questions over. If you'd like to speak to the candidates individually, I'm sure they'll hang around for a little while. There are 3 seats open.
That's some refreshments.
We have refreshments that you can use. There are 3 seats open on November 7th.